I never thought a single sentence could make someone vanish from your life like they'd never existed. Then I'm done, he said, and it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. I said, you're overreacting, but I didn't mean it, not really. At least, not entirely. And yet, just like that, she was folding herself into her coat, straightening her posture in a way that made her look untouchable, and I was left holding the words I couldn't take back. I'm sitting on the edge of the counter at the old record shop where I work, the vinyls faintly scratching under my fingers, pretending to sort through them when really I'm watching her. She always comes in on Wednesday mornings, as if she knows the precise hour the sun hits the back corner where the light is softest. Today, she's holding a faded paperback like it's a fragile relic. Her hair, the color of dark caramel with strands of silver she doesn't try to hide, falls in perfect, deliberate disorder around her shoulders. She tilts her head to read the back cover, and I swear the world shrinks to the space she occupies. She notices me staring, not that she would ever call it that. Instead, there's this brief flicker, a pause in her breath, like she's weighing whether to acknowledge me or not. Then she glances up, and our eyes meet just long enough for my chest to tighten. She smiles, just a hint, enough to make me question everything about the way I've been living my life. I tell myself it's ridiculous. She's older than me, experienced, probably far too sophisticated to ever glance twice at someone like me. Yet, every word she says, clipped, efficient, just a little amused, hits me differently. You'll find this one hard to put down, she says, nodding toward the book. Her voice has that warmth that makes you feel like she's letting you in on a secret, even when she's just talking about the story on the cover. I manage a laugh, awkward, trying not to sound like I'm melting from something as simple as her tone. I might need help with the ending, I say. A pause. She cocks her head, just slightly, and I feel it before I even realize. A spark. Not overt, not intentional, but present. There's electricity in the silence that stretches between us, in the small tilt of her wrist as she places the book on the counter. My hand brushes hers accidentally, or maybe not entirely by accident, and she doesn't pull away. Not immediately, just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, but enough for the hair on my arms to stand on end. She picks up the book again, flipping through the pages as if she's searching for something. I glance away, pretending to reorganize the vinyls, but I can feel her gaze on me. She doesn't say anything about the bump of our hands, and maybe that's what gets me the most. The unspoken acknowledgement is heavier than words could ever be. I want to ask her something. Anything, but my mouth dries up before I can form a sentence. Finally, she sets the book down and straightens her coat. She's ready to leave, and I can't tell if the lingering look she gives me is curiosity, amusement, or something more complicated that I'm not supposed to decipher yet. As she walks out, her heels clicking softly against the tile, I realize that I'm already counting the hours until she comes back. And then it hits me. That tiny, imperceptible pause when our hands touched, the faintest brush of warmth against my skin. It's all I can think about. I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't care this much about a woman who could probably teach me 100 things I don't even know I need to learn. But I do, and I can't stop thinking about it. I never expected Wednesdays to feel like a countdown, but there I was again, waiting for her in the cluttered backroom of the repair shop, where I'd been helping her sort through some broken antique radios she insisted were worth saving. She arrived precisely on time, as if the world revolved around her internal clock, carrying that same deliberate air of composure, like she could handle anything life threw at her. And yet, something in her eyes today was softer, quieter, more fragile than usual. She didn't greet me with a smile this time, just a nod, as if acknowledging my presence was a formality, not an invitation. She placed the first radio on the workbench, her fingers brushing the edges gently, and I caught the faint tremor of her hands. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. I noticed because I always notice. We worked in silence for a while. I tuned screws, wiped dust, and tried not to let my gaze linger too long on the lines around her eyes or the subtle exhaustion in the tilt of her shoulders. She hummed softly to herself while examining a circuit board, a sound so low I wasn't sure if she realized I could hear it. Something about it made me want to lean closer, as if I could share the burden of whatever she was carrying. "Be careful with that one," she said finally, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something she didn't want to say. She rarely asked for help, and the fact that she did now made the air between us feel heavier, charged with something unnamed. I reached out, guiding the fragile component into place, and our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. I caught her watching me once, a fleeting glance that seemed to hover longer than polite etiquette allowed. There was a hesitation there, like she wanted to say something but didn't, like she had a rule about keeping distance that she was trying not to break. I wanted to ask her about it, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. I noticed the little things. The way her hair caught the fluorescent light, the slight crease in her brow when she concentrated, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the musty smell of old electronics. I noticed the way she laughed at nothing, a quiet, almost self-deprecating laugh that seemed to surprise even her. At one point, she paused and leaned against the bench, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes softened, just a fraction, and she sighed, as if admitting something to herself that she couldn't say out loud. That vulnerability, so brief, so fleeting, hit me harder than anything she could have said. I wanted to reach out, to anchor her somehow, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting the air between us thrum with unspoken tension. As she turned to hand me a tiny screwdriver, our fingers grazed, and I felt it. The gentle pull of something forbidden, something that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. For a heartbeat, she didn't look away, and I swore I could see a storm behind her calm, a hesitation that mirrored my own. And just like that, the world shrank to that moment, that brush of fingers, that charged silence that neither of us knew how to break. The rain had started softly at first, tapping against the windows of the tiny cafe where we'd ended up after she insisted on grabbing something warm, on a night that had started as just another Wednesday. I wanted to tell her how much I looked forward to these small, stolen hours, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly, watching the steam curl in the dim light, stealing glances at her out of the corner of my eye. She sat across from me, her coat damp around the collar, hair sticking slightly to her neck. She didn't say much, scrolling through her phone with a kind of distracted focus, but every now and then she'd glance up, and I'd catch it. That subtle hesitation, the almost smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked tired, more human than I'd ever seen her in the pale daylight of the shop, and somehow that made her more magnetic, more untouchable at the same time. I wanted to reach across the table and brush a damp strand from her face, wanted to trace the outline of her jaw with a finger and see if she'd flinch or lean closer. But I didn't. I couldn't. The line between what I wanted and what I should do felt impossibly thin, taut as a wire ready to snap. We were quiet for a long stretch, the cafe mostly empty except for the hum of the espresso machine and the occasional scrape of a chair. Then her phone buzzed, and she glanced down. I saw the name flash on the screen, someone I didn't know, someone who clearly belonged to the life she didn't share with me. She frowned for a brief second before sliding it into her pocket. A small crease appeared between her brows, and I wondered what the message said. Curiosity clashed with my instinct to look away. I wanted to respect her privacy, but I ached to know every corner of her world. "You okay?" I asked softly, finally breaking the silence. My voice was tentative, almost too quiet, like speaking louder might shatter whatever fragile calm existed between us. She hesitated, just a beat too long. "Yeah," she said, brushing a hand against the table as if it could anchor her. But her eyes betrayed her. I could see the hesitation, the unspoken worry, the tiny vulnerability she tried to hide behind that composed exterior. I wanted to lean in, to close the space between us, but the sudden flash of her phone and the invisible line it represented stopped me. Instead, I watched her, memorizing the way her lips pressed together, the soft curve of her shoulder, the way she tucked herself slightly into her coat, like she was protecting something precious. My hand hovered over the edge of the table, close enough to almost touch hers, almost close enough for her to feel it. A lightning flash illuminated her face, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met in the reflection of the window. Everything seemed to pause. The rain, the distant rumble of thunder, even the hum of the cafe. I leaned just a little closer, my heart thudding like it might break the fragile spell. And then she shifted, just enough to put the distance back between us, a gentle, almost imperceptible retreat, leaving me staring at the empty space where my hand had hovered, and the storm outside mirrored the storm inside me. The workshop smelled like solder and old paper, the dim overhead lights casting long shadows across the scattered tools. We'd been working side by side for hours, fixing a battered radio that had survived who knows how many storms and moves. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the fluorescent bulbs, the tension between us had grown so heavy it was almost tangible. She didn't speak for a long time, just adjusted a tiny screw and tilted her head, studying the circuit board with that careful precision she always carried like armor. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but I wasn't sure what words could possibly make this easier or less dangerous. Finally, she exhaled sharply, a sound that seemed almost like a confession. I looked up and caught her eyes, dark and steady, but with something vulnerable flickering beneath the surface. "Why are we like this?" she asked, almost whispering, her voice rough with the weight of unspoken things. "Why is this so complicated?" I froze, my fingers hovering over the tools. I wasn't expecting honesty. I wasn't expecting the rawness of it. The way she said it, slow, deliberate, hesitant, it pierced through the fog I'd been living in, the quiet obsession I hadn't named yet. "I don't know," I admitted, my own voice low, uncertain. I don't even know what this is, but I can't stop thinking about it. About you." Her lips pressed together, and she let out a small, bitter laugh, not really at me, but at herself, at the impossible mess we'd gotten tangled into. "You mean what we shouldn't be thinking about, right? Because that's the only way this could make sense." I swallowed hard. I wanted to argue, to insist it wasn't wrong, but I couldn't. She was right. Every glance, every accidental brush of hands, every lingering pause had piled into this unspoken avalanche, and now there was no pretending. We were standing at the edge of something, neither of us willing to leap, but unable to step back. She put down the tiny screwdriver and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, but it did nothing to hide the tension radiating from her. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the faint shadow under her eyes that hadn't been there the first time I saw her. She was human, tired, complicated, untouchable, and right here, impossibly close. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to bridge the gap, to erase the distance I had built with restraint and fear. But the words died in my throat. Silence filled the room again, heavy, almost suffocating. Every tick of the clock sounded louder, each one echoing the truth neither of us could yet say. She finally broke the silence, voice quieter this time, almost fragile. Maybe we're just afraid of what it means if we stop pretending it's normal." She didn't look at me. She stared at the floor, tracing the cracks in the tile with the tip of her shoe. I felt my chest tighten, a sudden ache of longing and fear. I wanted to argue, to comfort, to fix everything with something I didn't even understand yet. But all I could do was watch her, watch the armor crack, watch the human beneath it tremble like it was being exposed to light for the first time. And then she said it, barely audible, like a prayer or a confession she couldn't fully own. "I don't know if I want to be okay with this anymore." I wasn't expecting the note. It was folded neatly, edges worn, tucked between the pages of the old repair manual she'd been thumbing through while I organized tools. She didn't say anything when she handed it to me, just pressed it into my hand with that quiet weight she always carries, like she's giving more than paper, like she's giving a piece of herself. I unfolded it carefully, almost afraid of what I might find. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, precise, and immediately I knew it wasn't just a casual letter. It was a relic of a life she rarely spoke about, a life full of things she didn't want anyone else to see. And then I read the words, and the room seemed to shrink. "I thought I could live without you, but every day is a reminder that I can't. I miss you more than I should. and I hate that I let it end this way. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I saw a fracture in her composed exterior. Her jaw was tight, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere behind me, but I could feel the tremor in her hands as she folded the letter back and tucked it into the pocket of her coat. I wanted to ask her about it, to reach across the counter and say something meaningful, but all I could do was watch and breathe quietly. You knew him, I said softly, not a question, but a recognition of the quiet weight she'd been carrying. She let out a bitter laugh, not loud, just enough to vibrate against the metal tools around us. I did. A long time ago. It didn't end well. Her voice was steady, but it carried a weight that pressed against the air between us. I noticed the way her shoulders slumped slightly, a rare crack in the armor she always wore so well. I didn't know what to say. There was no perfect line, no reassurance that could erase the ache of her memory. Instead, I just reminded her quietly, almost without thinking, sometimes we don't realize who we're losing until they're already gone. I think it's okay to let yourself feel it. Her eyes flicked to mine, a sudden glimmer of something she usually hides, gratitude, sorrow, confusion, all wrapped into one. She didn't answer, just shook her head lightly and picked up a small screwdriver, turning it in her fingers like she was grounding herself. I could see the pulse of old pain in the set of her neck, in the slight quiver of her lips, and it pulled at something deep inside me. For a long moment, we worked in silence, side by side, repairing the radio that felt heavier now somehow, like it carried all the unsaid words between us. Each tick of the clock, each quiet clink of metal against metal seemed amplified, the air dense with things we couldn't yet speak aloud. And then, just as I was about to break the tension with some awkward joke or unnecessary comment, she paused. Her hand hovered over the final screw, her eyes lingering on mine longer than necessary. A small, almost imperceptible tremor passed through her fingers. For the briefest second, the world felt suspended, fragile, waiting for something to tip it either way. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, to bridge the invisible distance, but I didn't. Instead, I let the moment stretch, letting the unspoken ache fill the room. She exhaled, softly, almost inaudibly. And in that breath, I felt it. The quiet seismic shift of something in her heart, something that might never fully settle, but that had just nudged us closer than ever before. The shop was quiet, quieter than usual. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the windows streaked with fading droplets that caught the pale light of street lamps. We hadn't spoken for a while, just worked side by side on a radio that didn't really need fixing, but somehow needed our attention anyway. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with something we both knew, but neither would name. She glanced at me from the corner of her eye, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. Not guarded, not composed, just her, real, fragile, and human. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt cheap compared to the truth hovering between us. Instead, I simply adjusted a tiny screw, feeling her presence like a warmth pressing into my shoulder. "You don't have to do that," she murmured after a while, eyes on the radio. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was gentle, cautious, almost like she was testing the air. "I want to," I said softly, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't shatter the fragile peace. I could feel the tension in her shoulders relax, just a fraction. Her hands were still, but I noticed the faint quiver in her fingers as she held the screwdriver. Small things, but I noticed. I always notice. For a long moment, we worked without speaking. Then, as if pulled by the same invisible thread, our hands brushed. Just once, light, almost accidental, but enough to make the air between us electric. She didn't pull away. She didn't tense. She just let it happen, and for the first time, it felt like permission, not to say anything, not to act, just to be. I wanted to reach across, to close the space between us entirely, but I didn't. I just let my hand linger near hers, letting her feel it, letting me feel her presence. And in that quiet, ordinary gesture, everything shifted. All the months of hesitation, the stolen glances, the silent tensions, they didn't need words anymore. She sighed softly, a sound that wasn't quite relief, but wasn't despair either. I looked at her, really looked, and I saw every layer of her. The strength, the sorrow, the laughter, the quiet heartbreak. And I realized that this connection, this impossible, fragile, unspoken thing, wasn't going away. Neither of us could stop it, and neither of us wanted to. She finally reached out, and our fingers intertwined almost without thought. Not dramatic, not declared, just a touch, a grounding point in the quiet chaos of all we'd felt. I felt her warmth, her pulse, the gentle certainty that this was real, that we were both leaning into something we couldn't yet define but didn't need to. We sat together then, side by side on a creaking stool, the radio forgotten, the world outside muted. No words, no promises, just the small, simple truth of presence, of recognition, of understanding that sometimes connection isn't announced. It's quietly earned, softly claimed. I leaned my forehead toward hers, almost imperceptibly, and she didn't move. A shared breath, a small grounding touch, a mutual acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was ours. No drama, no declarations. Just two people who had finally stopped pretending, who had finally let the tension fall into something fragile, earned, and undeniable. And in that silence, I realized it was enough. That quiet, impossibly delicate enough, was everything we needed. It's strange how some moments stay with you, not because they were grand, or cinematic, or obvious, but because they were quiet, small, and impossible to forget. I find myself thinking about that night in the shop often, the way the rain had stopped, the way the fluorescent lights made everything look softer, more forgiving. The way her hand had brushed mine, like it was nothing, like it was everything. I've changed since then. I notice the little things now, the pauses, the unspoken truths, the weight of a glance. I'm slower to judge, quicker to listen. I carry the memory of her presence with me, not like a burden, but like a guidepost, a reminder that connection can be earned in silence, in attention, in patience. And her, she's different too, I think. Not outwardly, not in ways anyone else could see, but in the way she lets herself linger, in the moments she allows vulnerability to show. She smiles a little more freely, laughs a little softer, carries a weight she once tried to hide beneath perfect posture and carefully measured words. And maybe she doesn't even realize it, but she taught me something I can't unlearn. We never had to define it, name it, or make it official. That was the point. Love, if it exists at all, doesn't always need labels. Sometimes it's in the quiet of a shared space, the subtle reassurance in a touch, the unspoken understanding that someone sees you fully and chooses to stay anyway. That's enough. That's everything. Looking back, I realized the tension, the hesitation, the storm of emotions we carried, it wasn't wasted. Every glance, every pause, every small act of care shaped us, made us human, made us real. And maybe that's the truest thing I've learned about love. It isn't about fireworks or declarations or perfect timing. It's about noticing the things that go unnoticed, staying when it's inconvenient, and daring to be seen even when it's terrifying. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll keep meeting like this, quietly, stealing moments that are ours alone. Maybe life will pull us apart again, as it always threatens to do. But for now, I hold the memory, the quiet resonance of what happened, the feeling that sometimes connection is enough, even if it's fragile, fleeting, and impossible to put into words. And so, I sit here, replaying that night in my mind, smiling at the memory of her hand brushing mine, the almost imperceptible pause where everything shifted. That tiny, charged moment, it changed me. It changed her. It changed what I thought I knew about love. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this? Because sometimes the quietest, most subtle moments are the ones that leave the deepest mark.